Okay. So automation, right? It's the ability basically to create a series of workflows that execute in response to a trigger. That's really what we're talking about. So here's a couple of questions for you. First of all, I'm assuming that some of you, most of you, maybe none of you have used CloudFormation. I'm not even going to talk about Beanstalk. I'm not even sure why it's here actually, because it's not an automation tool. It's more like a wizard for EC2. And then Terraform. How many? By the way, how many of you are using Terraform at your jobs on a daily basis? That's a question I really am curious about. Good. Okay. How many of you are using CloudFormation? Yeah. Good. How many of you are using something like Pulumi or Crossplane? No. Good. Yeah, Crossplane's interesting. Not yet really ready for prime time, but close. Okay, so what we're going to do here is that, our CTO has basically said, look, we're going to AWS because we want agility. We want to, be able to build infrastructure faster, right? So how can we automate this? And then, particularly around CloudFormation, which is peculiar, unique, focused exclusively on AWS, right? So can we simplify the build process? Can we manage multiple sources as a single unit, like multiple resources like networking, security, IAM, users, that kind of thing? What's the best way to deploy and maintain and scale web applications in the cloud? Now, from their perspective, they list Beanstalk as a higher level service, but just to say this, Beanstalk is really kind of an advanced best practice wizard for getting into deploying simple kind of like web infrastructures, right? And it uses EC2 as its underlying resource. You can also add RDS. You can use containers as well, but it's not really an automation tool. It's just a wizard. So I'm not really sure why they have it here, honestly. CloudFormation, though, is definitely infrastructure as code, and it is not in the same category as do it yourself with Amazon EC2. With EC2, you're either using the command line or, some other tooling just to launch, a set of virtual machines. CloudFormation will pretty much launch any resource that's available inside of AWS just by submitting a YAML or a JSON file. So while Beanstalk is cool, because you could submit some code and ask, answer a few questions, answer a bunch of questions. Beanstalk has like 120 questions it could ask you that you could get the answers to, like, do you want a database? It'll create the stack. That's not really the same thing, though. It's just you can't really check any of this into a repository. So doing infrastructure as code with Beanstalk is really hard unless you do it in CloudFormation. And what's funny is that Beanstalk uses CloudFormation. So I'm sure there's ways to extract that, but most people don't interface with Beanstalk via CloudFormation. They just use the Beanstalk interface. Beanstalk, by the way, has been around for a long time. 2011, something like that, 2010. So now, what we're really talking about automation tools, we're really talking about Systems Manager for running systems and CloudFormation for provisioning systems. So one stands them up and the other one manages them once they're running. Now, you could also throw OpsWorks in there. OpsWorks could also be used in the place of Systems Manager, but that's if you're already using Puppet or Chef or the company they bought called Scalar a long time ago. If you're not using configuration management, Systems Manager will do more than just manage EC2 instances and has better and tighter integration. So OpsWorks is good to know about if you need a Chef or a Puppet server, but Systems Manager is a better option. So let's say you want to deploy your development environment in another, AWS region without redoing all the work. Well, let's talk about that. So this is going to be a conversation about infrastructure as code, how CloudFormation builds stacks of resources, services, the way templates work, and then a particular website that AWS has called Solution Implementations, and then just a little plug about the CDK, which is a way of creating CloudFormation templates using your favorite programming language. I'm going to, and remind me if I forget, I'm going to show you a funky little website that I found the other day that will export stuff into Terraform, Pulumi, CDK, all kinds of stuff. So infrastructure as code is basically the ability to like define in a file or a series of files your infrastructure, and that can be checked into a repository. Sometimes there's a state association. Oftentimes there's not. It just depends on the tool. With CloudFormation, what ends up happening is you submit this, it says architecture template. It's basically a CloudFormation template. That gets submitted to the engine. The engine parses it, and then it creates the resources you've defined inside the template as part of like that particular stack. So a template is nothing more than a definition. That's all it is. So the benefits of infrastructure as code is obviously repeatability, because you can make something the same way every single time, as long as you account for any variables. In CloudFormation, that would be your parameter section, right? Where you're basically, it's asking you questions like, what's the label of this? What's the name? You could also put conditions, mappings, and other things in there as well, right? Now, by the way, if you have a template and you need to update the security groups across the entire template, you can do that. Now, the cost of that centralization might come at the cost of, a lack of granularity, but it all depends on how you want to approach it. So CloudFormation, you take the file, you submit it into the engine, it creates the resources, and that therefore you get your stack at that point in time. Now, a template, which is arguably the most important thing, it's the beginning and the end, honestly, either comes in JSON or YAML, and every time you see the word type, whatever is beneath that type is the object it's going to create. So if the type says, AWS, VPC, or subnet, or internet gateway, or internet gateway attachment, or route, right? Route table, and then route table attachment. If it says those things, then that's in a sense what that template is doing. That reminded me of something. Hold on one second. So oh wait, was it here? Hold on one second. Oh, that's right, it was here. I was moving it around. I think I was like putting stuff in here. Let's see. Oh yeah. So here is option, like just an example of some YAML, right? That might make sense here. And oof, hold on a second. I don't know why it's doing that. So for example, this has a description to it. Here are some parameters, but the main thing that we're interested in is the resources. So for example, this says AWS EC2 VPC. The reason, by the way, it's under EC2 is that VPC hasn't been shifted from, it was originally created under EC2. So it doesn't say like, I think I said VPC. It says EC2 VPC. Notice here that it's got an internet gateway. It has a VPC gateway attachment. Here's a subnet, right? And so what's happening is that everything underneath here is details about how to create a route table. Everything here is details about how to create a route, right? And so these types define what objects are going to get created, and then the properties are the various attributes and other rules and whatnot that are created for that particular object. Now, this is all under a section called resources. This is a required section under a CloudFormation template, because this is going to define what you're going to create. Now, it's really hard to pull this off without some kind of integrated editor or some other kind of understanding of the documentation, right? Because you're not just going to like pull this out. Like learning a programming language, you're going to have to learn a little bit about the syntax a little bit. Now, most of us take someone else's CloudFormation templates and just kind of make our own, right? Modify it as we see fit. Or we take these sections of like, hey, this is an entire instance ID. We'll take this and copy it and then modify it as we see fit. So it's not like you have to write these things from scratch per se. You could actually take somebody else's. Word of caution, if you take somebody else's and it does something like this, where it's getting a zip file or running a bash script, please, please, please parse that out. That's a huge security hole. You don't know what's in that zip file. So unless you know the author and you are owning that zip file, please be aware of where you're getting, you're sourcing from. Like, what's your supply chain here, right? So just consider that. But that's basically, an example of a pretty simple, actually, CloudFormation file. Now, in this file, it's going to take those resources and it's going to make all the things that are listed there. EC2 instance, a subnet, VPC, internet gateway. It's going to make all those pieces. And it's doing that because you gave it to CloudFormation and said, hey, I want you to make this stack, right? Now, those questions that it asked, which was under a parameters section, those are questions that you can answer that says, hey, I want you to link to this other networking CloudFormation stack. Maybe you're referring to a security stack. There could be linkages between stacks inside of, the CloudFormation template. Now, you can also go in and submit a template, have it ingested, and then go in and change something about the template. Like you could change, for example, the security group as the example earlier. Or you could change the number of EC2 instances in an autoscaling group as an example. When you create a change set, you can view it, the change, like what it's going to tell you what it's going to do, and then it's going to implement the change set. Now, here are the different sections that can make up a template. Notice that I mentioned parameters and resources already. Notice that resources is required. The rest of these, as far as like conditions, conditionals, maps, transforms, and outputs, you can use those, as you need to. So mappings just contain key value mapping. So if you're like look up a region, you want to pull up an AMI ID, you can do that. That's the old way of doing it, by the way. The template that we were just looking at, by the way, contains the new way. You can actually look up the latest Amazon AMI by calling a parameter store, right? So it actually will look up the AMI ID in question. So, oops, sorry. Notice here, it's actually looking up a, right? It's actually looking up a default value, right? So this is the AMI ID. So it's actually looking up a systems manager public parameter that's being published out for everybody to use. But mappings could be used for setting key conditionals. You could actually set conditions that says, hey, if, parameter equals prod, do this. If it equals to dev, do this. Transforms are mainly used for a Lambda function, so I'm not going to get into that because that's a little bit too deep of a meta. Outputs are mainly used for, like if you make a load balancer and you want to share the DNS name, instead of having to parse the entire template or go look at the resources it created, you can just have it listed there in outputs. So it'll actually show you everything that you should know or that the author wants you to know about the outcomes of this template. Outputs are pretty cool, actually, by the way, because they make it really easy for you to find useful information like IP addresses, what was installed in the server, like that kind of thing. Now, you can stack templates. So a template can refer to another template. So for example, you can pull in attributes and values from another template into a forward template, assuming that you have access to those attributes and values. So templates can stack onto each other. For example, user groups, base networking, shared services, backend versus front end. You can actually have those independently integrated as long as everyone is aligned and like they're publishing out what they're talking to. So just know that you can actually use a layered approach. So just depends on how you want to structure your organization around that. A lot of people, by the way, will take CloudFormation templates and stick them in Service Catalog, which allows you to vend the template out. So the networking team might say, hey, do you need a network? Well, you can use this template to do it. They also may publish it using something called stack sets. Stack sets allows you to push a CloudFormation stack across a bunch of different accounts. And then if someone needs a network, they can just grab it that way. Sometimes people do that in combination with Service Catalog, which allows an account to go and grab a standard networking template from the networking team, launch it, and then that way, by the way, if the networking team updates the networking stack, it can also be propagated down to the account that's using it. So that way you can maintain consistency between like networking and security and whatnot. Obviously, you can also break a lot of stuff because these technologies allow us to break things larger, faster, and quicker than we've ever done in history. Go look at the last 2 weeks of AWS outages to get a feel for that. So just know that there's lots of different ways to push and replicate CloudFormation stacks across all of your accounts inside your enterprise. Now, they have a solutions implementation section, which basically is a bunch of predefined templates and scripts, including deployment guides that you can then bootstrap into your account. Let's go take a look at that, actually. Where are you? There you are. So if you type in AWS solutions implementations, these are self-deployable, right, options that you can look at. So let's say you're down here and you're like, you know what? I really love Kubernetes. I probably just said that out loud. And I'm interested in Rancher. What you can do is you can click on these guides, and what will happen is that you can actually view the deployment guide for deploying Rancher in your environment, and it will walk you and provide you things around cost and whatnot, what the license are, what the general architecture is for what this template creates. And then what will happen is that it'll ask you to plan the deployment. Do you need to increase any service quotas, things like that? And then basically it'll let you choose one of the 3 deployment options, which means you can deploy Rancher into an existing, right, EKS cluster or VPC, or just a new one and a new one. And then you sign into the Amazon account, and then you just click on the thing you want. Now, if you want, you can just view the template. So if you want to see the template, right? Oh, look at this. Lint spell exclude for when it runs tests. That's funny. Okay. So here, by the way, is the CloudFormation interface. So here's some parameter groups. Here's some parameters, right? Including node type and family. So these are questions that it's going to ask, basically. And then as you come down, if we're going to jump into the section on resources, again, here's more parameters. Notice that some of these, by the way, have regex in them to basically like prevent any kind of deviation from the standard pattern. And some of these have defaults set up into them as well. These are questions that are going to be asked of you when you ingest this template. And then more parameter values, so questions that it could ask. Notice that most of these, by the way, have a default. Notice in this case, it's actually blank, right? There's also, by the way, restrictions on like allowed values. This is a pretty involved CloudFormation template, pretty good. Now, notice here's some conditions, by the way. Let's see. If enable Prometheus is, enable Prometheus is set up, then basically, if this is enabled and we've set up the monitoring stack, right? Then it looks like it's going to enable Prometheus. Detect shared stacks. Are we doing a 3 AZ deployment? So it's going to look at the number of AZs as 3, or, right? Not equal 2, not equal 3. Then we're just going to, by default, do that. That's weird. So conditionals can basically say, look, if this is true, do this instead, right? Or do this. And then here's some mappings of which they only have one. Interesting. Config value equals EKS quick start. So I guess they're just setting a label on the configuration. And then what's happening here is that they're actually creating a stack with a bunch of like sub URLs. So it looks like it's pulling another template. Cool. And then another stack, which is auto detect shared resources. So this stack is actually creating other stacks. So this is going to spawn off a bunch of stacks. Now, let's say that we parsed it and we're comfortable with it. If you click on the link and you're actually logged into your account, it's literally going to dump this into CloudFormation. And it's going to say, hey, answer all my questions, right? So it's going to want you to answer all the questions. And if I answer all the questions, including the defaults or whatnot, once all that is answered to a satisfactory level, then I can click on create stack. Note that a good template has defaults for things that could be optional and requires you to answer questions that are very important for the person to pay attention to. So this actually would be a pretty robust thing to run. I'm not going to run it because I don't want to kick off a bunch of resources, but Yeah, there's so much really cool stuff here. T3 mediums, right? You could go for different machine sizes, number of worker nodes, right? Set it into an auto scaling group. Anyway, so there's some good options here. My point being is that solutions implementations is where you would actually find technologies that you want to like get CloudFormation templates for, so you don't have to write your own from scratch. That's what this is used for. So you can grab templates and not have to write them from scratch. Now, another thing you could do is if you're comfortable with Python or TypeScript or Java or .NET or any of the approved languages, you could also write in your favorite code. You could write, using the Cloud Development Kit. Now, one thing to know here is that there is actually a CDK workshop that you can use. It's a public unlisted workshop by AWS. So if you're not familiar with this, you can actually practice writing CDK using the CDK command line, and you can actually just write. Let me show you what this would look like. So this is all Python preparation stuff. Display the project directory. So for example, you're actually importing a AWS CDK as CDK, and then you're basically you're setting up an app, right? You're setting up an infrastructure is what you're really doing, right? So in this case, the stack is going to include an SQS queue and an SNS topic. And notice that it has SQS queue and SNS topic set up as these particular pieces. And then they've done an add subscription where they're going to subscribe the SQS queue to the SNS topic. This is all defined in code. You can easily do that if you want to. So the CDK is a way of you defining objects in code using the CDK structure. And then basically what it does is it imports and converts it over to CloudFormation and runs it from there. So that way you can keep it in code and not to learn how to write CloudFormation per se. So this is a little workshop on that. I don't think there's probably other CDK workshops, but this is the most popular one that I've ever seen. So here, writing some constructs like a hit counter, including CloudWatch logs for the Lambda function in question. So anyway, if you're interested in running this, all it requires is a free account. Please do not use your booz email to create an AWS free account. You'll have to create one yourself. You'll probably spend maybe 10 cents, 25 cents on this. So as long as you don't leave anything running. If you leave something running in the background, that's on you. Make sure you turn it off as soon as you're done with the lab. Don't walk away for 2 days and expect it not to charge you. It will. So that's the CDK, the Cloud Development Kit. Lots of options with that. The Cloud Development Kit is still AWS proprietary, but at least you're writing in your language of choice, okay? And you get a lot more programming constructs when you use the CDK. Interesting. Okay, that was all CloudFormation. So whether it's the CloudFormation file with its like 8 possible sections, including the resources section, which is required, the ingestion of that into the CloudFormation engine, the creation of stacks for the resources, using stack sets to distribute those CloudFormation templates out. There's a lot to CloudFormation, but that's just a brief skim because this is not the system operations class, which is where most of that is handled at. Questions? Okay, that is all about provisioning. That's really what that's about. So when it comes to actually configuring running systems, though, it's like, how do I get inventory, compliance, apply patches, run maintenance windows? How do I do all that stuff? Okay, this is another one of those things that's just going to be a light skim. Okay. Systems Manager has 17 at last count. It probably has 18 now. Subservices underneath it. Let's take just a quick little walk down memory lane here for a second so you can see what this looks like. This, by the way, is the main focus of the system operations on AWS class. So to be mindful, and I'm going to close these out just to make it simple for us to look at. Operations Manager has, for example, Explorer, so you can explore compliances and issues. Ops Center, so you can track issues and security issues across your entire enterprise related to EC2 instances. CloudWatch dashboard, by the way, is per CloudWatch, so just ignore that. This is the personal health dashboard, which will tell you if a outage being published by AWS is actually affecting your resources. And then Incident Manager, which is actually relatively new, which basically allows you to open and close and manage incidents with a automated response plans. So if something pops in here, you can associate a response plan, right? Just know that like you can actually associate some kind of response for each of the instances in question. All right. In addition, application manager. Oh, it actually opened everything back up. Application manager, basically, kind of similar to app config, is going to allow you to manage which applications are started and where. What's how are we launching them? How are they configured? App config allows you to do configuration. So whereas app manager allows you to manage the state of apps and where they're deployed and all those other pieces, app config is going to allow you to define configuration files that can be used to configure your app at deployment time. Parameter store is used to store parameters that you want to share. So think of this a little bit like almost like a vault, where if you need to get access to information, like the database username and password and whatnot, you could actually store them in parameter store, not just AWS secrets, right? And then we got a change manager, we've got automation manager, we've got a change calendar, and we've got maintenance windows. And those are all just related to change control. Now, when it comes to node management, we've got compliance reports, inventory reports, session manager, which we've used several times to connect to instances, and the ability to basically manage state, do patches, and distribute software inside of these nodes. And the last piece is just these automation documents, which is part of the automation relationship under change management, which allows you to execute things like shutting out security groups, configuring SSH. Like you can actually do operating system configuration changes and AWS configuration changes using those automation documents at the very bottom. I know that seemed like a lot, but that's way more than just like what they provide for you here. Systems Manager does monitoring, compliance management, configuration management, provisioning, entitlement. I could spend 5 days on Systems Manager and still not be done with the whole thing. So there's a lot to this little subservice over here, as far as it basically does everything necessary to manage and run your fleet of EC2 systems. It'll even manage non-EC2 systems like containers and some Lambdas as well. Okay. Here's basically all the services, right? Arranged. That's it. Just 3 slides on Systems Manager. So just know that that is, like I said, the focus of the entire system operations on AWS class. So you spend, at least a day and a half, like kind of running through that. So bottom line, CloudFormation is for provisioning of any AWS service or resource, and they support about 99.9% of them. So usually the newer services takes them a week or two to catch up on. Systems Manager is used to manage running systems. That includes patching, software distribution, application configuration, anything related to a fleet of EC2 boxes and the applications that are running on them. That's in the management of those systems. That's pretty much what Systems Manager does. Questions? Okay. So the next question is what is a CloudFormation stack, right? So question for everybody here. Good. Yeah. So CloudFormation stack are basically the resources that are generated by a template. So that means that everything that template makes is going to be part of that stack. If it creates other stacks, then you're going to see those show up as well. And you'll see some linkages there as well. So you can actually have a stack spawn other CloudFormation stacks. Not unusual. Okay. Which of the CloudFormation sections is actually required in order for it to be a CloudFormation template? The only thing you really need actually is you have to have the resources section. The rest of it is optional. Okay. Which of the following are benefits of using the AWS CDK with CloudFormation? That's correct, Timothy. So Tim, developers can use known languages, so that's nice, right? And then that's why we use it, TypeScript, Java, .NET, etc. And then developers can call pre-configured resources with proven defaults. So in other words, you can define a declaration for a server and then just like call that method or that declaration again and again and again to actually make the same server. In CloudFormation, you have to like copy and paste that over and over again with whatever slight changes you have. Here you can just refer to it and just make some amendments to the properties. Good. Yeah, they hadn't updated it. I saw that too, Christian. I was waiting for Rust to pop up there. Let's see into module 8. Questions of any type about that just brief automation skim. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about containers next. And actually, I'm going to bring this up because they make some assumption about containers, and I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page.